Welcome to Crossroads. All 55 million visa holders in the United States are soon going to be investigated. Every single one of them. The Trump administration, now they're looking into every single person on a visa for any signs of criminal activity, terrorism support. Have you overstayed your visa? Everyone's going to be investigated now. Also, federal authorities have raided the home of Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. Kind of shocking news. A lot of people didn't see that coming. But there are questions now of why they did this. Was it just about him? Is it part of a broader investigation? Why'd they do it? We will talk about this and a whole lot more today in today's episode. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and again, you'll get updates when all our great episodes are airing. Also, before we jump into the news, did you get a chance to check out my special report on the food dyes? If not, make sure to click on the link in the description below or go to ept.ms/banned dyes to watch it. And let me know what you think of the feature. That's going to be the first of many like it. Now, first off, visa holders are now being investigated. And I mean foreign visas, people visiting the United States. New York Post said this: the Trump administration will begin reviewing all 55 million U.S. visa holders to see if any have committed deportable offenses. Any immigrants holding U.S. visas found with, quote, indicators of overstays, criminal activity, threats to public safety, which we can assume is somehow different from criminal activity. Maybe they do something that's threatening to public safety, but they don't necessarily violate the law. Or it says engaging in any form of terrorist activity or providing support to a terrorist organization. And they will have their permits to live in the U.S. revoked and be deported, the U.S. State Department announced on Thursday. And as the State Department representatives told the Associated Press, all U.S. visa holders are subject to, quote, continuous vetting intended to identify deportable offenses, meaning this is all within the law. Now, how are they going to possibly review 55 million people? The simple answer is they'll probably doge them, right? The Department of Government Efficiency. What did Doge do? Well, they used artificial intelligence to do it. Presumably, this will be more like a big data analysis. This is purely my own take on it. They're very likely going to have to check, well, do these people have criminal records? Is this visa expired? And I would assume also they're going to be doing social media vetting. And I would assume that's going to be whether these people support terrorism or have engaged in any events that could be deemed terrorist supporting. Importantly, the Trump administration, remember the context of that? They're talking now, for example, about denying student visas based on support for Hamas or Hezbollah. They're even making it now so that if you're trying to become a U.S. citizen or enter the United States, you need to be reviewed for anti-Americanism or anti-Semitism. So if somebody opposes Israel, that may be grounds for expulsion. They are, it seems, interpreting it that broadly currently, the U.S. government. So it is possible anybody who has these kinds of things on their social media, they might get booted from the United States. Again, they're not being super clear on the exact standards for this, but that might be the case because they are now, if you're entering the U.S. from the border, that's what they're doing. If you're trying to come across the U.S.-Mexico border or the U.S.-Canadian border, they're checking your social media. And anything of this sort could get you deported or sent away. There was also the story of a guy who claims he was denied entry to the U.S. because he had a meme of J.D. Vance looking very goofy. The government clarified that the guy was not denied entry because of that. It was because of drug use. So we will see. So if you don't have anything of yourself doing drugs, supporting terrorism, or backing any kind of anti-Israel thing, you might be able to come to the U.S. and stay here. But again, we don't fully know we don't know where they're going to draw the line on this just yet, so we will see. Now, like alongside this, Trump said that his administration has been purging illegal aliens from Social Security. And this was during remarks he made in the Oval Office back in August 14th. Watch this.
And to protect our benefits, we've already kicked nearly 275,000 illegal aliens off of the Social Security system. These are people, many of them have already left the country, and yet we were sending them checks all the time. And 275,000, and that number is now even larger than that, Frank. It's an unbelievable job. And what that's doing is making the system strong. It's making it strong.
That's actually a pretty big deal. Why is it such a big deal? Because remember, illegal aliens legally are not supposed to be able to get social welfare or other programs like this. Now, if you were to talk to people before Donald Trump, they would argue that. They'd say, well, you wouldn't need to push them off Social Security because under U.S. law, they're legally not allowed to get it. They're not supposed to get social welfare. They're not supposed to get food stamps. They're not supposed to be getting retirement or, Social Security benefits or Medicare, Medicaid, anything like that. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're not eligible for that. But it turns out they were able to get it because of loopholes. The way they were getting around it was because of state laws. States were not checking immigration status. So if someone was here 10, 20 years, they wanted to apply for Social Security, to go to the office for it. The local government, like California is a great example of this, they're not allowed to ask you your immigration status. Because they were not checking that, people who were not U.S. citizens, people who were here illegally, they were getting social benefits paid for by American taxpayers. And also there was kind of in other areas, a semi-legal designation that was given to a lot of people who entered the country illegally. The Biden administration, they were granting people parole. That was an interpretation of parole that was never really used like that before. On the Trump side, among conservatives, they were saying that they were kind of abusing the parole system. And what that did was, if you had people coming here illegally, they were allowing them to wait in the U.S. until their cases were reviewed. A lot of them were applying for amnesty and things like that. They were under temporary protection status. They were granting them parole, which, again, you normally don't do. It's not intended for illegal immigrants. But once you get parole, you're given a semi-legal status. And when you have parole status, you can get social welfare, again, Social Security, food stamps, free housing, free food, and the whole 9 yards. Those were the loopholes they were using to get these free handouts. And because they were using these loopholes, that's why the Trump administration is now saying we're purging them from the system. They are now removing systematically all of these people. And it's going to be interesting as well, because as they review the 55 million visa holders, they're probably going to be looking into that also. One of the more common forms of illegal immigration is people come here on a visa, they overstay their visa, they never leave. 10, 20 years later, they're retiring, they're on Social Security and so on. I know people like this. And they're going to get kicked out if they're doing that probably, because it is a violation of U.S. law. Now, meanwhile, speaking of people getting kicked out of the country, the saga of the Maryland man continues. You might remember him. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the suspected MS-13 member who had the debate around whether MS-13 is tattooed on his fingers. It turns out it's symbols representing MS-13. And also other gang tattoos. Well, he's now facing deportation. He was accused of being an MS-13 gang member. He was sent off to a prison in El Salvador. He was brought back to the United States to face human trafficking charges. And now he's being let off the hook by the judge overseeing the case. But not let off by the federal government, because now he might get sent somewhere else, not to El Salvador. He was offered Costa Rica. He might get sent to Uganda. He's going to be shown the way. And now, as of this morning, well, he's been arrested yet again. He was crossing the border into Maryland, handcuffs strapped on him, getting ready for his new one-way flight. Wall Street Journal says this: Kilmar Abrego Garcia was arrested by immigration authorities at an ICE field office where he was set to be deported, putting the fate of the man who has become a flashpoint of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown into sharp focus. It says further in a court filing Saturday, Abrego Garcia's lawyers said immigration enforcement officials gave notice that he could be deported to Uganda. Why Uganda? Well, we don't know. And further in, it says Garcia turned down a government deal to deport him to Costa Rica if he agreed to plead guilty to human smuggling charges. He disagreed to be sent to Costa Rica. He can't go back to El Salvador because apparently things are rough there. And so he's being sent to what you call a third country. If you can't go home, you can't stay here, and there's other options for that, like Uganda. These third countries are places that they're not actually from, but they could get sent there if their own countries will not take them back. Costa Rica would have been another third country option. He declined Costa Rica. He gets the surprise mystery door, which is Uganda. And it seems he's being sent there now. Now, speaking of illegal immigrants also, well, Home Depot has become a new go-to place for authorities to pick people up and send them back home. NBC News said this. It said the sight of masked federal agents in tactical gear, which, by the way, is how the mainstream media is now defining ICE agents and government officials. They're not referring to them as ICE agents. They're calling them masked federal agents in tactical gear because, you know, they cover their faces because they don't want to be targeted. It says they're descending on Home Depots across Southern California, and this is forcing undocumented day laborers, the new media phrase for illegal immigrants, to weigh earning badly needed income against the risk of being arrested or deported. It says at least 2 Home Depot parking lots in the Los Angeles area were targeted Friday amid the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Day laborers were detained in North Hollywood and Alhambras as organizers shouted, demanding to see warrants and attempted to obtain as much information as possible from the handcuffed workers. They don't need a warrant to deport you. It's not the way it works. You're not an American citizen. This is not the way it works. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, they don't need a warrant to detain you and ship you off. Again, a warrant would be for searches and seizures, not to arrest people on the street and so on like that. If you're committing a crime, they can arrest you. If your crime is illegal immigration, they can arrest you and deport you. They don't need that. Now, it is common for illegal immigrants looking for work to hang out outside of Home Depot. Everybody's probably seen it. They also do it in front of Lowe's. Look, I've worked in the construction industry. Again, I did carpentry. There's actually a lot more to the issue of illegal immigrants looking to get jobs outside Home Depot. What is not often known is that some of these guys have actually unionized, and the representatives of them are usually gang members. They'll charge you not like $10, $15 an hour. They want like $30 an hour, $35 an hour. If sometimes they often scam people. And I know this because, again, I talk to people regularly who work in construction. They demand you buy them lunch. They demand you drive them. They don't have their own tools usually. They'll demand you provide that. When you pay them, they will throw a fit saying you didn't pay them enough, even if you're paying them $25, $30 an hour. Very common experience these days among construction workers, people who run businesses, again, because I know this because I talk to people who run businesses on a fairly often basis. There's also an issue that gangs have been trying to represent the illegal workers standing outside these places. This is becoming very common now. Remember, some of these suspected MS-13 gang members who have been arrested were people like this. They were trying to represent these, day laborers, I guess they're calling now. And what they do is they'll say, if you want to go up and hire them, they'll pretend to represent these people. They'll say, if you want to hire them, $35 an hour, you buy them lunch, you drive them, you pay me, and I will pay them. I represent them. That's also a very common experience people are having. And so you've had, because it's been allowed to happen for so long, you've had an illegal market be established in addition to the normal people looking for work. And so when it comes to those individuals standing outside Home Depot, Lowe's, not all of them are like that. But because it's a crime that's been allowed to be committed for a very long time, you've had additional criminal enterprises get established alongside it, which I believe is maybe part of the reason they're cracking down on it. The other big reason also is that it guts the normal construction industry. When you have guys who run construction businesses, they're competing with these guys now. And if you have to pay taxes, if you have to pay laborers, if you have overhead costs, you're not going to be able to compete with some random guy standing on the corner working with a gang to represent them. And because of that, it's damaging the entire market. It's costing people their jobs. So again, choose which side you want on it, but that's the other side of the argument. Also, on illegal immigrants, it's possible that ICE agents and other federal agents could get National Guard support in 19 states across the country. And it may not soon be even limited to 19 states. They could expand this across most of the country. This is going to be big. I'll explain why, but first, this is Daily Mail. They say as many as 1,700 members of the National Guard, not a lot as of now, will reportedly be activated to 19 states to assist ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. Now, why is this important? 1,700 is not a lot. If you have 19 states, my interpretation of this is basically they could have National Guard being deployed alongside ICE. That means if somebody is, for example, blocking ICE, if somebody is threatening ICE, if somebody is reporting ICE, National Guard can be deployed to assist or protect federal agents. Meaning, in sanctuary states and sanctuary cities where the police are not allowed to play that role, National Guard can play that role. And remember what Trump was saying, they wanted a rapid deployment force through the Pentagon to do operations like this. I personally believe that this is why they're doing it. This will effectively work as a law enforcement escort for ICE that can carry out law enforcement operations if the ICE agents are being blocked from doing their job, which has been a very common experience for them as well. They note this, so back to Daily Mail. They say it continues Donald Trump's use of law enforcement to stop crime and illegal immigration after he sent the Guard to Washington, D.C. earlier this week. I don't think the comparison to Washington, D.C. is totally accurate here. This will likely be closer to what we're seeing in Los Angeles. Again, this is Daily Mail. They're a UK-based news outlet, maybe not as familiar with the way U.S. law works. In Washington, D.C., because they're the nation's capital, they have it's a special district. And so the normal way the National Guard can be mobilized and used in Washington, D.C. is not how it can be normally mobilized and used in other parts of the country. They're not going to be able to carry out the type of law enforcement operations they're doing in Washington unless you have the local governments authorize the deployment, which they're not really doing right now. More likely, the way this is going to work and the way the Trump administration is actually explaining it, this will be closer to what we're seeing in Los Angeles. Again, National Guard being deployed, bypassing the local government. The only roles they can play are protecting federal agents and federal buildings, assisting ICE or other federal agents in deportation or whatever else they're doing. It notes this, though. It says the troops will be mobilized from August until at least mid-November in the crucial border state of Texas, which will have the most significant presence, Fox News reported. Other states where activations are reportedly being planned are Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, and Wyoming. Quite a few places. It says troops will be used to support ICE with case management, transportation, logistical support, and clerical functions. There will be the escorts and assistance to ICE operations. It says they will also be used to deter people from committing crimes, a Pentagon official told Fox, which goes back to what I was saying. What could be a crime? Blocking federal agents from doing their job. I think that's going to be the most common crime they're going to be deterring. because if you try to sit in front of an ICE vehicle, if you try to push or block ICE vehicles, if you try to stand in a doorway and say you can't do your job, ICE can't really do much against you, and they have not for the most part. The National Guard could if they're being deployed, and their job, again, their job is to defend federal agents. If you do that, if you throw rocks at their vehicles or anything else, very common experience they're having, you can be arrested and you can face some pretty serious charges. They're now moving on that. Now, again, we'll see where this goes. The other possibility also is that they could be federalized. They could be used to actually do some, again, the other big possibility is this could be kind of an introductory move, that the 1,700 National Guard troops could be kind of a first step, a foot in the door to broader operations. Because what Trump is also saying, is that there is a crime problem across the United States. And to be fair, this is the other side of it. They're talking about deploying, again, federal agents to Chicago, to Baltimore, to other areas, not just to go after illegal immigrants, but to go after crime. And when it comes to the model of Washington, D.C., again, remember, under current law, they can't really do that. What Trump is talking about is declaring emergencies. And if Trump declares an emergency, a national emergency on crime, a national emergency on something else, then he will have more latitude to deploy the National Guard and use them in a law enforcement fashion. Now, why would that be important? Why would that be a big deal? This is why I'd say. The National Guard presence could be in place, I would personally say, as a safeguard against issues of mass protest and riots. And I believe this would be important leading up to the midterm elections. Now, this may sound like speculation, but I'd say it's speculation based in fact. Because remember, the use of mass protests and movements, this was starting to ramp up around Los Angeles. The whole thing has mostly died down. Who remembers the LA riots? Who remembers the No Kings riots? And who remembers that during every single major election, it is unfortunately the case, but it is true, Democrats very often organize mass protests, mass movements. Those very often turn into violent riots. You've seen what Antifa does, for example, currently carrying out very violent operations, by the way, in many parts of the United States, including in Seattle and other areas. Very often they do that. The BLM riots, Black Lives Matter riots, were also very much, part of the whole election platform during previous elections. They've held other mass movements, mass protests. The pro-Gaza / anti-Israel protests also have turned relatively violent. And they've been trying to mobilize similar protests against deportations. Mass movements, mass protests, and yes, sometimes violent protests, unfortunately, have become part of the normal election cycle in the United States. Look, to be fair, some people criticize Donald Trump and point to January 6th as his almost equivalent to that. I'd say if you look at officers injured by actual protesters, it's on par with your average, mass protest on the other side. But they don't criticize it the same. I would actually say that the deployment of the National Guard is meant to deter against that. I would personally believe this is not just about deportations. I think, based again on the talk of having a rapid deployment force through the military, based on what we witnessed Trump do in Los Angeles, because remember, technically the National Guard, if you read on the books, they were deployed to assist ICE and protect federal agents in federal buildings, but the deeper context of that is they were deployed in response to the riots that were starting. And I think leading into the midterm elections, we will probably see the normal other side of the political campaigns, which is the mobilization of riots and mass protests. I know it's controversial, but in the United States, this has been the common experience during every major election, that the Democrat Party does organize mass protests, which very often turn into riots. And of course, the No Kings protests have been the latest one with that, many of which did turn into riots. So again, it seems that Trump is putting things in place right now to respond to that possibility. Now, on another topic, though, federal authorities, they've raided the home of Trump's national security advisor, that's John Bolton. And I'll be talking more about this, what it means, why it's important, after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers. Support us and independent journalism by hitting that like button, leave a comment below, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you, really. Now, on another topic, federal authorities, they raided the home of Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. And this is controversial. On the left, they're saying this is retribution. On the left, they're saying, how dare Trump go after his political enemies? On the right, they're saying this is justice for the retribution that Trump and Republicans experienced during the Biden administration, and just justice coming because of, well, the attacks on Trump over the last decade. Believe which side you want, but here's what happened. The Guardian said the FBI raided the home of Donald Trump's former national security advisor turned critic, John Bolton, early on Friday morning, and later also turned up at Bolton's office. The federal search of Bolton's house in the Washington, D.C. area was understood to be part of an investigation involving the handling of classified documents. The Associated Press reported, citing a person familiar with the matter, meaning we don't really know. I'll explain more context on that in a minute. It notes this, though. The FBI Director Kash Patel posted a cryptic message on X on Friday morning saying, quote, "No one is above the law," and further said FBI agents on mission. Now look, really we don't have official details yet on what they're looking for, why his home was raided, the full context of it. There's been a lot of speculation, there's been some claims on it. Classified documents are seeming to be the most commonly cited element on why this might have happened. Some have noted this could be about his 2020 book titled The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. Donald Trump tried blocking Bolton from releasing that book, which was, just it was a quote-unquote tell-all that was made, it seemed, to attack Donald Trump. His experience during his first term in office, many people who worked in his administration turned against him. And after he left office, many people published books, went on the media, criticized him, turned against him. Very few people of his administration stuck by him afterwards. And on that point, of course, John Bolton was among them. Trump tried getting Bolton to not release the book. He released it anyway. The Department of Justice was actually investigating it. They dropped the investigation under the Biden administration. The reason they were concerned about John Bolton's book is because they claimed it contained classified information, meaning it violated the law. Again, the Justice Department dropped the investigation, so we can't say it was a a violation. But it was also said to have violated non-disclosure agreements that Bolton had signed with the Trump administration when he gained his position. Now, on that point, just because the Justice Department previously dropped the investigation into whether or not John Bolton had classified documents and might have committed a crime by publishing them, does not mean they cannot reopen that investigation. You cannot be charged with the same crime twice in the U.S., if it's the same exact thing, not that you can't commit the same crime twice, meaning just because they dropped it, they can still investigate him. They can pick up where they left off and look into it. On the other side of it, there's also speculation and claims going around that the context of the raid was that John Bolton allegedly has a private server, and on his private server, he was sending highly classified documents. Now, remember, before Donald Trump and the raid on Mar-a-Lago, that was kind of normal in politics. Hillary Clinton was accused of it. She was not president. Remember, she was at the State Department and, of course, the first lady for a while. Bill Clinton was accused of it, even accused of smuggling documents out in his socks. They called it Socksgate. Joe Biden was accused of it before he was president and, of course, had classified documents in his home. The issue is people typically don't get charged for this. This is, in other words, seemingly a very common practice. And it was not something ever really taken seriously until the FBI raided Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, investigated him for having classified documents. Trump said, look, I was president, not a senator, not, national security advisor. I was president. I have special privileges, executive privilege, and the president has broad declassification authority, meaning Trump said basically, I have legal authority to do this. All those other people did not. Why are you not investigating them? And because Trump, again, was saying, why are you not investigating them? He can now say, well, you went after me for this. I know all of you do the same thing. I'm going to go after all of you. And on that ground, that's why people are saying this is retribution. Trump is now saying, well, you went after me, I'm going after you now. Vengeance, retribution, call it what you will. Or is it just equal application of the law? On that point also, they're saying one of the most common forms of retribution they're now seeing is real estate violations. Remember, they also did that to Trump. When Trump was when Trump was out of office, they were trying to say that Trump, misvalued Mar-a-Lago. Others say it was ridiculous. They even tried suggesting that because Trump probably devalued it, not overvalued it. But Trump's now actually, his administration now, they are criminally investigating and looking at possible charges against many, many people on the other side of the aisle, Democrats and others, including some who previously went after Trump based on real estate violations. Now, is that retribution? Is that Trump saying, hey, you did it to me, I'm going to do it to you? Or is that just, again, equal application of the law? Is it the what comes around goes around type thing where they open the door for this and the door goes both ways? You tell me, right? It does seem that it is more targeting people on the other side of the aisle. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking back on the raid on John Bolton, he also commented on it. This is what J.D. Vance said about the raid during an interview with MSNBC. Watch this.
We've learned that the FBI is searching the home of former Ambassador John Bolton, his office as well.
Sure.
Can you tell me, why is the FBI raiding Ambassador Bolton's home and office, and did the White House get a heads up?
Well, so we're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. I will say we're going to let that investigation proceed. What I can tell you is that unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come. But as you know, Kristen, this is all part of gathering evidence, trying to understand something that we're worried about. And of course, I'll let the FBI comment on the next stage of the investigation.
What's at the root of this? Is this about classified documents?
Well, again, I'll let the FBI speak to that. Classified documents are certainly part of it, but I think that there's a broad concern about Ambassador Bolton. They're going to look into it. And like I said, if there's no crime here, we're not going to prosecute it. If there is a crime here, of course, Ambassador Bolton will get his day in court. That's how it should be. But again, our focus here is on, did he break the law? Did he commit crimes against the American people? If so, then he deserves to be prosecuted.
Now, look, alongside the raid, there are other indicators of actions, let's say, against the intelligence community. And this is important. This is really big because, remember, John Bolton, he's Trump's former national security advisor. And there are signals right now that maybe this is part of something bigger going on, that there's a kind of purge taking place within the intelligence community. And remember, the former head of the CIA is looking like Trump may go after him. Former heads of the FBI looking like Trump may go after them. Also within the intelligence community overall, there's a lot going on right now. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he just fired Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz. He was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And the firing of him followed others like that, including the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the former chief of naval operations, and a lot of others in the military. Meaning the heads of kind of the intelligence groups within the Pentagon, they're being purged right now. It's even bigger than that, actually. Even employees with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, huge purge going on. Tulsi Gabbard, she actually fired close to half of the ODNI employees. That's a lot of people. And we also see the same thing happening with the FBI. They're firing tons of agents. Remember that they got a list of about 5,000 agents who had cooperated in any form with the investigations, arrests, or cases relating to January 6th. And it looks like they're purging all of them. So it does seem the Trump administration within the intelligence community, they're going after a lot of people, heads of agencies especially, including with criminal investigations, including, again, not just some of the ones we're hearing about, possibly others soon to come, but also employees. There's something bigger going on. We don't fully know what that is, but it seems Trump, they are, in fact, kind of purging house. They're cleaning things out. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. Yeah, Ann F., you're saying, what about Mike Flynn? He was a security advisor. General Flynn was one of the few who really stuck beside Trump. Flynn really stood beside Trump. Remember General Flynn? He was purged because of the whole Trump-Russia narrative. They were saying that he attended a dinner in Russia and they used that to go after him. And remember what we know now. The entire Trump-Russia thing was a hoax, meaning they effectively used a false story to force Flynn out of the Trump administration. Flynn was among the very few people who stood beside Trump, despite all that. Wilma Eden and Kash Patel stood beside Trump, despite all the attacks also. There were a very few handful of people in the previous Trump administration who really stood next to him. Wilma Eden, you're saying that's an easy way to leak information. Publish a book. Get paid for book sales and paid by the party wanting the information. Sounds profitable, but legal, maybe not. Okay, so I can tell you all some inside baseball as an investigative journalist and as somebody who's watched this stuff for almost 20 years now. I've been a journalist since 2006. Coming up in a few months is going to be my 20th anniversary as a journalist. Isn't that crazy? I can tell you the way that books are used. Books sometimes can be used just because somebody wants to write a book. They want to write their memoirs. They want to have their legacy. They want to have their story that can, students can write essays on and journalists can write stories about. A lot of people write books because it's an easy way to get media coverage. If you write a book, I can tell you as a journalist, you're more likely to be able to get interviewed. especially if you get published through, like, you're not self-published, you're published through like an actual publisher, because it's kind of viewed as a vetting process. The publishers, if they choose somebody, it's kind of like, okay, they vetted you, you're probably not crazy, not saying crazy people don't get books published, and you're a little more credible. It's a lot easier, it kind of works towards your credibility, and you can use your book to reach out to media and get coverage. Those are two of the biggest reasons why people publish books. If you want to make money publishing books, you're probably writing, young adult fiction or something like that. Those are the money makers. Or you're writing romance novels, because those are the money makers, right? There are certain money maker books, and they're not memoirs. Let's put it that way. The other reason people write books is this. You want to frame a narrative. You want to leak information, or you want to reframe something to cover up a crime. And this is the more nefarious side of the book publishing industry. Sometimes they will. So keep in mind, propaganda is not just about emotional manipulation. Propaganda is about the framing of the interpretation of information. This is called psychological warfare. So I've talked before about, briefly, China, the Chinese Communist Party, and its military operations for information. Psychological warfare, media warfare, legal warfare. So it's the same thing when it's applied to other countries in terms of how they use information operations. Information operations, they take advantage of media, right? Media warfare, outlets of information. Social media, maybe they want to suppress certain viewpoints and promote others. Look at how, for example, the COVID-19 narratives went, where they deplatformed certain people and then propped up the opposing voices. Look, for example, at some of the political shenanigans we've watched, where voices that represent oppositional stances are often censored and suppressed, where the supportive voices are often given additional weight. We saw that leading into the elections, the politicization of many outlets of information. Facebook was doing it, X was doing it, Twitter was doing it, Reddit does it really bad. Reddit partly even bought up, some of their big shareholders are Chinese, by the way. TikTok is just open season for it. You find a lot of that. YouTube is fantastic for that, right? It's gotten better, but it used to be. Where conservative voices are silenced, deplatformed, censored, and the establishment voices, more so leaning left, they're often given just absolute free rein. And so that does have political implications because you can suppress certain narratives along partisan lines, which can be advantageous for elections, right? That's media warfare. Psychological warfare is not about necessarily lying to you. Psychological warfare is altering how you interpret information. So, for example, January 6th. How do you interpret January 6th? Was it an attempt to overthrow democracy? Was it an attempt to block the counting of the Electoral College votes? Was it the greatest assault on democracy we've ever seen, an assault on the Capitol building? Or was it the Trump administration trying to challenge what they believed was, election interference? Was it staged? Was it a big problem? Were there, agitators in the crowd? Everybody's looking at the same basic facts, right? Everybody's looking at the same incident, January 6th, obviously. But how do you interpret it? That's where you get into the battle of narrative. And the battle of narrative, there's the normal grassroots side of it. I mean, I've made documentaries about January 6th. But there's also the political side of it and the intelligence side of it. I'm not saying that specifically, I'm just giving this as an example. Where there would be psychological warfare operations to intentionally frame a narrative and push that narrative onto the public with the intent of carrying out a political agenda. You see this with every major incident. Every major incident has some kind of political warfare operation tied to it. I'm not saying just the United States, I mean international powers. Everybody has their official narrative, right? That's psychological warfare. So when you're talking about books, sometimes, not all the time, when there's political thinking involved, you're going to have your partisan thinkers on it. They want to put forward a certain narrative. That'll be the psychological warfare narrative for it. Sometimes individuals will also do this. Let's say somebody committed a crime, right? They did something illegal. They know they did something illegal, but they need to frame it as not being illegal. What do? You present the facts, but you change the context and interpretation of them. Because remember, in the United States, intent is a big deal when it comes to crimes. Intent, the context of the way something happened, and also whether you knew something was a crime or not. And so sometimes they'll use books to rephrase the way an incident happened, to remove the criminal intent from the way it took place. I didn't realize this was happening. And they'll frame an entire narrative around the accidental stumbling upon something that could look bad, right? That could look bad if it was interpreted another way. Sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it is not. But there are people who use books to cover up crimes, and that's the way they do it, basically. And there's also the other side of it, too, which is sometimes some of the major publishers get money through the government. They get huge grants and stuff like that. You know, the Trump administration, they canceled a lot of that. And then sometimes these book companies will give massive contracts to very partisan actors. And there are many people who believe that's a way of paying these people off, using money that's effectively laundered through taxpayer funds through these companies, right? Is that intentional? Is that the case? It depends on how you interpret the facts, right? Another great example of psychological warfare. I'm not saying that's a psyop, but I am saying it's an example of the difference in interpretation. On the more lenient side, people would just say, well, of course, a book publisher wants to have the big names and the most controversial people to write a book. Obviously, you'd want that because what's going to happen, that controversial figure all the media want to interview, they're going to be going around getting, spots on every major talk show talking about their book, and obviously a publisher wants that exposure. Obviously, they're going to do it. On the other side of the political aisle, I know there's a lot of people who say this is a way of laundering money to pay people off. And they believe this is a way of kind of taking taxpayer dollars, funneling it through normal businesses, and then using it as a kind of payment system to people. Which way do you interpret it? This is a perfect example again. We're all looking at the same facts. The difference is how you interpret the facts, right? How do we all interpret the exact same set of information? That is one of the things that defines psychological operations, right? How do you interpret it? Another question here. Aerolola626, you're saying, do you think this is a means to ban student visas from hostile countries such as China? So you're talking about the Trump administration saying they're going to review 55 million, all 55 million visa holders in the United States. I think what you're talking about is it's also happening, but I don't think this is necessarily part of it. Why is that? It's because they're already doing that. So the Trump administration right now, they're reviewing every single visa holder in the United States. Whether you're here visiting, whether you have a work visa, you can have your H-1B visa, or, you know, they have a lot of different tiers of visas. I don't even know all of them. They have student visas. They have all kinds of them. They were already, before this recent announcement, they were already reviewing the student visas. So that was already being carried out. Because remember, one of the big things they're saying is that there's all these protests at American universities, and some of these people are people who have ties to terrorist groups, or they've overstayed their visas, or they're not even students sometimes. They're still on student visas. They're still like living on campus, but they've been out of college for like 4 years, and they're like doing mobilization for protests at universities using their visas, and they're not even students anymore. Like, what the heck is going on? They're finding cases of that. They've already gotten rid of a lot of people who were here using the student visas because of that. The full picture of it now looks like it's an expansion of that. And that's going to be big because, you know, a lot of people who are here in the country illegally, they've just overstayed their visas. That's a huge part of illegal immigration. And that's going to be important because, you know, it's one thing if you snuck across the border in the dead of the night and, you know, you're like that kind of illegal immigrants. And it's another thing if you violated your visitor's visa. Why is that a big deal? It's because, you know, there's been a debate in this country over whether illegal immigration is a crime. Violating your visa is undoubtedly a crime. It's just not a crime that's really been prosecuted. And so you have a lot of people who, you know, they overstayed their visa like 20 years ago. That's right. And they've been living here, working here 20 years. They probably started a family here. They probably have kids, if not grandkids, right? And you have quite a lot of people like that. A lot of people like that. If they start reviewing those people and booting them out, that's a lot of them. Because if you're here that long, they're going to be able to find out where you live. Let's put it that way. A lot of those people, they have home addresses. They might be getting Social Security. Their kids, they've probably gone to school. The government's going to be able to find out where they're at. That's going to be a very easy way to find and deport people. And it's going to be really controversial because what you're going to be watching is people whose kids probably are legal immigrants, or not immigrants, you know, people who are here through the anchor baby thing. Like, you know, if you're born in this country, you're a U.S. citizen as of now. And a lot of those kids will be probably not a lot, but some of them are going to be of voting age, right? So you're going to have a lot of those people getting deported probably. The other important piece to that is if you were here on a visa, they can actually review your social media. They can investigate you. They don't need a warrant for it because it's part of the actual review process. And let's think of how that looks, okay? If you're a U.S. citizen, the federal government can't just open up your social media, say, hand your phone over, go through it, which they're doing at the borders right now, and which they do if you apply for a visa. Anybody who's applied, and this has been told to me by friends who are on visas, right? If you come to the United States, that is the normal protocol. They have to search your social media. They will ask you when you get your visa, what are your social media account names? You have to give that when you come to the United States if you're on a visa. What does that mean for the 55 million people on visas? Well, let's say somebody's been here 10 years, 20 years, and maybe on their maybe they've gotten into the drug trade. Maybe they're engaged in crime. Maybe they support Hamas or Hezbollah. Maybe they hate the United States. They hate the U.S. Maybe they've joined protests against the United States. Maybe they participated in the No Kings riot. Maybe they participated or gave material support to individuals engaging in a riot. No Kings protests, anti-ICE riots, the Hamas protests at American universities. if you did that, not even participating, supporting, giving material support to, or ideologically supporting, they may be able to use that to send you away. And that's aside from the point where, again, even if you haven't overstayed your visa at that point, they can criminally charge you, especially if you've been engaged in the drug trade. If you materially supported a cousin who got trafficked. One important thing when it came to mass migration, and I know this because I investigated it, a lot of the people who came here from other countries were being supported financially by their families in the United States. That's illegal. That's against the law. That very broadly happened, but that actually violates the law. So people, they had to pay the cartels, they had to pay human traffickers. I mean, you're talking $5,000, $7,000. I've heard just for the checkpoint with the cartels at the U.S.-Mexico border, I've heard some people were paying $5,000 to $7,000, right? So if you're paying people, you're giving money to a family member and they're paying the cartels, that is material support for for a cartel, which is a terrorist organization now. But that's also giving material support to them, and that's giving money for a crime. Every single one of those people who will now be investigated if you did that. Again, I don't know how broadly they're going to interpret it, but you could face criminal charges and you could be deported. And if you've overstayed your visa, they're going to deport you anyway. But you might see a lot of people facing criminal charges. I mean, a lot of people. A lot. And I would say 500,000 would be a very conservative estimate, right? If you want to hear my personal take, 500,000 would be a very conservative estimate of the people who will face criminal charges. I would even venture to say 1 million or maybe even a few million of these individuals because of the way the nexus and culture around illegal immigration works, where if you come here illegally, you have to pay. For the most part, you have to have paid a human trafficking organization. And I don't want to say too high. I'd say maybe even many million people could be criminally charged on that side of it. But we will see. We will soon find out. Get ready for things to get wild, I'll say that. Seymour Butts, you're saying, when a person comes from a country where the average wage is $5 per day, living on our welfare is a life of luxury. Yeah, which is also what some people I've heard criticizing people who come here and complain, mentioning, right? The minimum wage in a lot of countries is barely a surviving wage. And in a lot of countries, you don't have the type of opportunity like you do in the U.S. And this isn't even just like the third world countries. Even some, relative first world countries, it's really hard to get by. When I was, one example, when I was in Taiwan, visiting there, remember I was covering the elections, I was talking to people about the cost of living in Taiwan. The rent is crazy high. Rent in Taiwan is insane. And the average wage in Taiwan will have you barely meeting a basic living standard. And you're talking like, you think you have small apartments in New York, you're talking like really small apartments. And they're not regarded as a third world country, you know what I mean? Like that's first world country standards, kind of. In China, people talk about the sparkly lights and stuff like that. There was a report that came out recently saying about 1 billion people in China, the overwhelming majority of the population, is in absolute poverty. 1 billion people in poverty, over that, because they've been lying about their numbers. Poverty in China is not like you're living in the suburbs and you're living off welfare, like in America, that's poverty. In America, poverty is you live in an old house. Like you live in like an old Victorian house that probably has like 3 to 5 bedrooms, It's run down because it's on you if your house is run down. It's not anybody else's fault. You live in like a 3 to 5 bedroom house in the suburbs and you live off welfare. Like in America, that's poverty, right? In China, poverty is your toilet is a trench in the back of your house with a wooden board going over it with exposed fecal matter. You can't afford like a $5 toy for your child, and you're a peasant. That's what poverty looks like. Poverty in China looks like you work in a factory 6 days a week, 12 hours at least. You're not allowed to date, right? Because you can't have people focused on other things other than work, and you're making like barely any money, and you're inhaling toxic fumes all day long. That's poverty in China. And that's not even as bad as some other countries. Poverty in other countries is a lot different than what we talk about as poverty in the United States. Poverty in the United States is you don't give me enough social welfare to buy that Xbox video game I really want. I'm stuck playing a video game from 3 years ago. Like that's welfare in the United States, right? Like poverty in other countries is a lot different. And when people talk about dictatorship in America, try to tell that to people who've lived under actual dictatorship, complaining about, they're so mean to me here. And look, I had in California, in Riverside, my mom lives out there. One of our neighbors, I'll tell you some real stories. One of our neighbors, it was a family, they were from Iraq, and they fled under Saddam Hussein. Of course, hardworking people, good people. They had a daughter who she was gone, like mentally. They lived like two streets over from where my mom lives. Their daughter was mentally gone because she had been tortured under Saddam. I won't get into the details of what they did to her, but some of the worst things you can do to a human being they did to her, right? One thing the Saddam Hussein regime would do, and they torture people, but the problem was even afterwards, a lot of people were persecuted by like rival factions. So one of the things they would do, they would abduct your children, they would torture them to death, they'd video record it, and they would send you the video afterwards so you could see how they killed your child. One of the common things they do is they get electric drills and they drill into their feet, using like the long drill bits. They do that to your child and then send you a video of it. That happened to the family that lived by my mom's house. And then you want to talk to people like that, being like, oh yeah, we live in a dictatorship. How do we survive? The government won't fund my gender transition. How do I live under this new Adolf Hitler? You talk to people who've lived under real tyranny, and you try to tell them that, they're going to want to barf because it's disgusting. They're like, you don't even know what tyranny is. You have no idea what tyranny is. I know people who've dealt with horrifying things. I remember I talked to a woman from China, a Falun Gong practitioner. And, this was when I was kind of a new reporter, and I hadn't really talked to people who'd been tortured, right? And she was telling me what it was like living in one of the re-education through labor camps in China. If you're a Falun Gong practitioner, you believe in truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. You basically practice like Chinese yoga, right? That's basically what it is. It's like Tai Chi with a moral standard, and they kill people for practicing it because there's too many of them. Imagine going to prison for that. Not only prison, but slave labor, and then having a re-education program blaring in your ear. They have something they do where they have like Chinese propaganda songs, and they play it at different volumes all through the day and night. It gets to the point where they blast it sometimes, like Chinese propaganda, like sounds, music and stuff like that, like, their songs. Other times they play it so low that you can't tell if you're imagining it or if you're actually hearing it. They start playing with your head. They have blinding lights on 24 hours a day. You lose track of night and day. They have sleep deprivation, where there are people who die from that, but you go like days or days and days without sleep. If you fall asleep, they beat you. If you're a woman, they strip you naked and they throw you in a cell full of criminal men and they gang rape you. There's documented stories, including United Nations human rights reports, of women getting raped with electric batons by the prison guards. I talked to one woman who, lived through some of this, and I've never really saw this before. She had a flashback while she was talking to me. So she really kind old woman, she's like, "Oh, young man, I want to tell you my story." She starts telling me about what she went through, and then her eyes change, and she's having a flashback, right? And she starts freaking out, and then kind of like comes back to herself, and she's like breathing hard, and she realizes, she's like, she apologizes, but most people have never seen that type of trauma. Most people have never seen that kind of thing. And, people here, they talk about, we talk about, oh, my trauma, oh, I was neglected as a child. I mean, that's terrible too. Everybody's dealt with that a little bit, right? But there's some real bad stuff out there. And a lot of people can't even comprehend it. They can't comprehend what real tyranny is, right? I'll tell you one more story. Okay, when I was a kid, I grew up all over the place. It's not fair for me to say it like I went to one place. I went to 3 high schools and I did homeschool, okay? I lived between San Diego, New Jersey, and Costa Rica. I lived in multiple places in San Diego. I was kind of all over the place growing up. I mean, I had a very diverse childhood. But one of the schools I went to was in Santee in California, all right, San Diego. To emphasize what Santee was like, during COVID-19, there was an incident where there was a viral video of somebody, you had to wear face masks, and there was a guy with like a KKK hood. That was Santee. And when I saw that, I was like, of course it's Santee. Because, we had problems of that in Santee. When I grew up in Santee, there actually were like neo-Nazis. You actually have the KKK out there. My brother would often get harassed by them because, he looks more like my dad and he's darker skinned. So he would get harassed all the time. Like he had to fight every day growing up. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. He had to get in fights all the time because these groups would harass him, right? When I was in it was in junior high, like 7th, 8th grade, that movie came out. What was it called? American History X, which was about the guy who is a neo-Nazi. Was it Christopher Nolan, right? The movie was supposed to be like a cautionary tale against hate, but when I was a kid, a lot of people went the other way. A lot of people watched that movie and they actually agreed with the narratives and they became like neo-Nazis. So the school I was in had a big problem of that. There were a lot of kids who started getting really into like neo-Nazism. What my school did was really interesting. So this was, again, before the whole woke stuff, before they tried to shove all these narratives down your throat. Do you know what my school did to end the problem of kids becoming neo-Nazis? They brought in a man from Czechoslovakia whose family was killed by the Nazis. And to this day, that stuck with me, right? To this day, what I saw and heard from that man, I will never forget it. So the way the school dealt with the neo-Nazi problem is they had a big, school conference. They brought all the students had to join, and they had this old man go up on stage, right? Old man, he looked like anybody's grandpa, right? And he's very nice, and he's telling his story. And he says that he tells about life in Czechoslovakia before the Nazis and stuff like that. It became Czech Republic and Slovakia later because they broke it up. But a lot of people who were from there, they still call themselves Czechoslovakian, right? So he said that when what life was like before and the life after. And then he says what happened is the Nazis, they abducted him, his father, his mother, and his sister. And of course, the other villagers. They brought them to a bridge over a river, and what they did was they tied the parents to the children, right? So they tied them together. And the reason they did that was because they would shoot the parent would fall in the water, and the child would drown. So I guess it was a way to save ammunition, right? I don't know why they would do that, because I don't know, right? Maybe I think it was more like just a sick. I think they were just being sick in the head, to be honest, right? But they shot the man's mother, and his little sister was tied to her, and they fell in the water. And then they shot his dad. Yeah, sorry, folks. This stuff gets to me, right? I get legitimately bothered by some of this stuff, so you have to forgive me. But they shot his dad, right? And then his dad fell in the water, and he got lucky. They didn't tie him tight enough, and he was able to get away. And he grew up an orphan, and eventually came to the United States and became an American, right? But we all watched as this old man broke down crying on stage in front of the entire auditorium. And when that happened, the whole problem of neo-Nazism came to an end. There were no more neo-Nazis at that school after that day. And that was more effective than calling people names. That was more effective than trying to, ban students or ban their social media. Watching that old man break down crying in front of us changed the whole school. And I would say that that type of empathy is more powerful than cancel culture, is more powerful than is more powerful than a lot of things, because when you start to really understand this stuff, it puts it in perspective. You start to finally understand, oh, that's what that is. That's what that is, right? Anyways, folks, thank you so much for being here. I apologize. I'm kind of anybody who knows me knows I'm kind of a big softie. This stuff gets to me. You know what I mean? Anyways, if you haven't seen it yet, my new special features out that came out on Friday. I investigated the banned food dyes. Why are they restricted in Europe? Why are they allowed here? What are the laws on it? What are the loopholes? I answer all these questions. If you haven't seen that special feature yet, again, it premiered on Friday, meaning you can watch it right now. The link is in the description. You can also go to the URL ept.ms/banned dyes. And that said, folks, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it, share it, let someone know about it. I will see you again tomorrow. Happy Monday. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Despite being among the wealthiest countries on earth, despite our quality of life, Americans are among the least healthy people in the world. We've been told two very different narratives on the chemicals in our food.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days.
One of the issues at the forefront, artificial food colors. Certain food colorings, such as Red 40, which is present in widely consumed products, have been associated with behavioral issues in children, such as increased hyperactivity and symptoms consistent with ADHD. So with all these concerns, how are these dyes still allowed for use? What do we actually know about the effects of these artificial chemicals? Who are these qualified experts who generally recognize that these are okay for us to consume? Who has been making the assessment that these are generally recognized as safe? Something has led to a spike in health problems, and for some reason, it's impacting Americans much more than people in other countries. So what are we being exposed to that people in other countries are not?